Hello, friends. This is Hank, your pajama scholar, with another ambient glow radio presentation. And there are some things I wanted to cover as a matter of a practical course, because people are often not well educated on history, number one, and number two, they have a normalcy bias, and beyond that, they just don't believe that history can repeat itself. Well, it does. I mean, maybe not specifically, but it often rhymes. And I just thought I'd outline or go through a little bit of the big picture, because I know there's a lot of confusion about what's going on and what's to come. People are a little bit confused about the weather. People are confused about the distress of the nations. People are confused about the monetary system and what's going to happen with that. And I'm going to pretty much lay it out for you as I believe that is probably going to come to pass, so that you might be able to prepare. But first, I'm going to kind of preface it with a little philosophy and a little history, so perhaps with the context there's a better understanding. Now, for most of human history, there hasn't been electricity. That's only happened for about the past 200 years. And in that time, the world went from a population of about 1 billion to 8 billion. Now, electricity or power is something that I call a production multiplier. So it's kind of akin to a military force multiplier. If you have a certain amount of energy that you extract, then you get a greater yield. Just like if you had, if you were to apply a Gatling gun versus a musket rifle, you would have a pretty much a quantifiable statistic that you could use to determine basically the multiplication of force. So how valuable you make one man be able to create more things. And so, since this energy force multiplier has not existed for most of human history, certainly not enjoyed by the majority of Earth's population, it's changed the world. And I want to talk a little bit about the effect of energy abundance. Now, technologies permit survival in which humans become detached from an understanding of their environment, because I'm speaking of natural law, because in these days I observe people do not respect nature, nor do they respect natural law, and they don't have any concept of piety or true healthy and fear and respect of the Lord. And to forget God is to invite calamity. But that's just a bit of an aside, but it's very important, central to the entirety of it. But first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about birth signs, so you can see the difference in what was in the past and what exists today. So in the past, humans and the environment were so closely linked, the date of conception and the birth of the infant often produced specific characteristics to the child. Mothers would be subject to different diets, elemental exposure, hours of daylight, etc., during the pregnancy. Now, these varying conditions would ultimately produce quantifiably observable physical traits and dispositions that would be made manifest in the child. So even the season in which the infant was nursed directly following the date of birth had a significant impact on the development in an observable way. So this is kind of where some of the philosophies around your birth date produce specific characteristics, whether even in the shape of your body, your ears, your fingers, your mental attitudes. Now, this is not to speak to the balance of astrological forces and the magnetisms and gravitational forces that the solar bodies affect every creature on Earth, and even the tides and water and weather and all these other things. So I'm not speaking to that because that still very much is in effect, but I'm speaking more towards like the type of child that would be produced because of what the mother would have to endure or have access to. Would be very seasonal, be very much more in accordance with nature, as opposed to today in modern society, where we have kind of a relative homogeneity of year-round access to a wide variety of foods irrespective of season, and the stability of environment due to electricity. The once pronounced attributes of a person and their birth sign has greatly diminished. So we don't really observe those qualities of physicality that we, the ancients or even the elders, would observe. They're much less pronounced because you can pretty much have whatever diet that you want. You don't have to suffer environmental exposure. It's a little bit more stable. So that homogeneity, I guess, the homogeneous nature of everything being the same year round is going to produce kind of people of just similar attributes, irrespective of season. So, environmental factors contributing to the infant form are less connected to seasonal cycles and dependent more on choice of the mother and socioeconomic status. What could you afford? So that's just one of the things that I'm speaking of when I talk about how divorced modern man is from nature, because of energy. And this is all going to make sense because it's tied in, of course, to the fiat money system and the ramifications of having a monetary system that is not connected to nature. So if you have something that's in perpetuity in the abstract, such as money, fiat money that's not connected to something assayable, then there's no way to prevent environmental degradation, because humans, we all know, have a tendency to exploit their environment for money. And if you can just make money up, then it makes natural resources less valuable, and tribalists will go and cut down ancient trees and destroy sacred sites for a little bit of, fake money. So or fiat money, I won't call it fake, but fiat money, so somebody can have a table somewhere else in the world because they traded stocks or something all day and really produced nothing. So anyway, that's the divorce from nature that I'm talking about, and how if we're to understand money, it's got to to understand valuation, to get back to principles of valuation, the connection is going to have to be physical, which is just one of the myriad of reasons that I say that, Bitcoin is going to fail. But it's far worse than that. So, as bad as you think it is, it's worse. So, let me just move on. All right. Now, from 1 billion to 8 billion in 200 years, survivability and abundance created conditions by which community and cooperation based on reciprocal altruism and mutual need diminished. Unwilling to exercise control in the conception and care of children, life became so cheap, women became prepossessed with the political notion of the right to murder their unborn child. And to this I speak of abortion. So living in such a society, a day and age where the survivability of the mother is so high, promiscuity is such a prevailing philosophy, it makes life very cheap. If a mother is concerned with her political ability to quite literally murder her child, when in the past the likelihood that a mother would die had about a 50% chance of dying just in the act of giving childbirth, and then statistically speaking for the infant to even survive would be very low, and survivability was not even really concrete until a child reached the age of about 12 or 13. So in the old days, death was so close. All the time, death was so close that people had greater respect for life. And notions of, political this or that and petty disputes and squabbles, well, with the mutual benefit and necessity of survival being paramount, it just lends a little less to the importance of an individual's perceptions and feelings. I mean, nature really doesn't give a rat's ass how you feel. The osprey's going to come down and drop that baby duck and drown it. Baby duck doesn't really, I don't think, gets an opinion on the matter. So, this leads me to my next point. Life is cheap. Now, with technological and societal superstructures developed out of a sense of moral obligation by some, and this is where I'm talking about the well-intentioned people, parents became less occupied with parenting and more focused on production. That's what they were societally engineered to do. So the rearing and raising of children shifted towards institutions. And while community, and this is to say that community is vital to the development of a child, factory farming childcare and education created an entirely new set of consequences in the absence of strong and present parental influences. Children often looked to other children to develop societal structures. So you basically, many children are operating, for better or for worse, drawing on their colleagues and more on their people of their own age who lack the experience and wisdom to make great decisions because of the absence of the parent by the demands of the technological society. So in my opinion, with the advent of electricity, things should have gotten a lot easier. With the advent of all these technologies, life should have been a lot easier. And in many ways it was, but why so much was requested of a population, or why people pursued materialism in such a way without saying no, has always been an issue of perplexity for me. I digress. Now, the link to tradition, or what I call the old ways, was broken. Now, education can suffice as a supplement to wisdom, but education tends to lend towards specialization. Now, over-specialization is wholly dependent on a supply structure, which creates dangerous failure points. And I talked about something like this when I talked about AI, frail as monkey rock nutcrackers, when I speak to the chains of specialists that are necessary to maintain complex systems. Now, disruption in the supply structure magnifies individual difficulties because of the over-specialized individual. Or rather, disruption in the supply structure magnifies individual difficulties because the over-specialized individual is practical only under the right conditions. So, for the most part, the lawyer is useless unless all those other superstructures exist to make resolution of dispute through the letter of the law of paramount importance. Otherwise, people will find a more brutish way to resolve their disputes. When we speak of, say, the engineer or the computer programmer, all of these things are dependent on supply structures that deliver to them what's required for them to commit to their over-specialization. Whereas when I speak of wisdom, so therefore, education therefore is no substitute for wisdom or tradition. The scientific materialism of the modern era continually and often unnecessarily proves that which tribal communities have long maintained. And one primary example of this is in Cambodia. Tribalists often attain advanced ages of 100 years or more. Now, I'm not arguing to live in the forest or the jungle. I'm not arguing for a return to a tribalistic, well, in a sense I am arguing a bit for sort of a tribalism. But that's neither here nor there. It's a little bit different. But I'm a person that appreciates high technology, but I also appreciate the responsibility that comes with maintaining high technology and all the things that are necessary to responsibly wield high technology. And the dangers of not using that properly, or the dangers of not understanding money as a structure, capitalism as a structure, or to understand the underlying philosophies that make societies cohesive, why they're so important. So if you're going to have something, you need to understand the responsibility that comes with using it. Okay. So I'm going to speak to the coming days, so you can begin to expect what, well, is probably going to happen. Nature will reassert dominance. There's always a balance. Now, balance in life, especially for a human's life, a human is really, if you want to boil it down to just simply an issue of survival, you can be prepossessed of only two immaterial but very physical properties of the of this plane that we live on in the world, even though they're maybe immaterial was not the right word, intangible yet physical properties of the material world. That's what would be a better statement. And of this I talk about how a human's perception is rooted for survival in matters of time and in scale. So it's to say we all know the world's going to end at some point. Will that be tomorrow? Not likely. Delaney, please don't tear up my carpets. Thank you. So when you're considering factors of survival, consider factors of time and scale. Now, I'm a person that looks forward to the future, and I also study the past. And I find, despite the fact that I shout from the rooftops and do the best that I can to try and educate people about what is possible, what is likely, what needs to be done, what's total illusion, outright lies, people still cling to their notions, and generally speaking, they act almost in an animalistic way and don't plan for any situation. They simply react to the situation to them that's happening to them as it unfolds, which is a natural course, but I feel it's a bit base, and it's basically unguided, in my opinion. So let's talk about what's probably going to happen and the misdirections that have led us to this point and what the end game is really all about. And it could frighten you. So I want you to imagine this. So you can imagine the scale. So you can fully understand the return to natural law. You really only need to understand one event. And that's, stick your credit card or your debit card in the machine, and it just doesn't work. Now, expect that. Expect that to happen. Now, if you can fully understand the ramifications of that and how the people around you are going to interact and what's going to happen when that happens, then you have a pretty good grasp on the immediate reality, because it's an issue of, again, that's the scale. Now, the time frame is getting ever closer. You know, at a point not terribly long ago, I thought we would be looking at, the potential for an economic restructure based on something physically assayable. But as I've given it more consideration and more thought, I think it could be said that those that understand the damage that humans are doing to the environment because they are using fiat currencies to exploit nature, and they're not applying wise principles to judiciously use the technologies that are at their command, what would you do to take it all away from them and shut everything down? Take away the money. Just money ceases to exist. Period. So you can understand what that day where you stick your credit card or your debit card in the machine and it doesn't work. You got a pretty good grasp on the immediate future. Now, what you can barter with and all that other stuff, those are things you probably should have been thinking about for years. I've tried to warn people. I've tried to tell them it was a mathematical certainty. Because otherwise, people get treated like slaves. Quite frankly, to be honest, people are always saying, well, we need to stop. They keep thinking the stock market's going to crash. There's going to be a market correction. Well, here's another idea that's entirely possible and probable. See, I've been looking for a market correction since 2014. So I've been vexed, to say the least, that I basically have to sit and wait because I have no opportunity to save because the quality of money diminishes and property is overvalued. So essentially, myself and other people my age are being denied the right to property. Now, the United States principally is founded on the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but it used to be life, liberty, and property. They changed it to pursuit of happiness for probably reasons of eminent domain or whatever, but the important part is in the United States, people are supposed to have property rights. And my generation has all been basically enslaved. Like, if for example, a nurse gets too tired, is emotionally fatigued, is burnt out, she needs to rest and recover. She can't take that time that's necessary for her to get mentally right, so she can go back to what is a spiritually, mentally, and physically exhausting and demanding profession. So the philosophy of the corporation is, well, fire, get another one, but because there is no valuation, people don't have a respect for human capital, and that type of education and dedication doesn't grow on trees. Now, if the nurse was to stop working, to take the time that she would need to recover, they would essentially kick you out of your house. And if you said no, they would do it under force or at the threat of a barrel of a gun. Now, to me, that's slavery. Absolutely, 100%, that's slavery. Okay. Just because somebody says, "Oh, you're free." Well, to be free would be to do that. That is what is necessary for your own spiritual health, for your own development, and still be able to contribute to society. To find a situation where somebody that's working has no economic security in their future, those issues would have to be dealt with, of course, while we're all young. People are still married to these illusions that the stock market might crash, might correct. But in all honesty, it quite literally could go up forever, in perpetuity, because it's basically a series of algorithmic trading. I've talked about this before, like about a caps glitch. Make money is not the objective of business. It's not, money in and of itself is no end if you're not producing anything. And when those realities become divorced, where your nurses and your smiths and your mechanics, your doctors are not seeing value or valuation, they're going to divorce themselves from the system. We know we don't have the educated and trained labor to support the elderly and all the demands that the ignorant make on the educated. And yet, we're regulated or relegated to the same fate as someone else, which I consider basically, when you spread it all out and make everybody equal, that's communism. It's fascism, because the corporations are in control, followed by communism. Now, it's just not going to hold. It never works. People believe that they're operating in something other than a communist system. But when somebody tells me that the market price for something is something, and I have no opportunity to negotiate, haggle, or determine value for myself, and my right to property or a place to live and right to life, pursuit of happiness even, is threatened at the barrel of a gun, to be in compliance with massive bureaucracy, well, that's slavery. So it's just not going to hold. It's not going to hold. And so the stock market could go up forever. And I have more evidence to prove this, that it could be, part of a larger scheme. It's part of a larger mechanic that probably has something to do with the environment. This is a speculation, but one that I think makes perfect sense. So get comfortable with the fact you put your credit card, your debit card in the machine and nothing happens. Now, another important thing to consider, because when I say it's, I could deal with economic collapse. Think about that for years. Look to the Weimar Republic of Germany. If you want a little bit of evidence, historical evidence, fiat currencies have collapsed in history quite repeatedly. They generally have a lifespan of 35 years. The tulip mania of the Dutch, the tally sticks of the British, the collapse of the mark in the Weimar Republic, and on and on and on. But if you think that's bad, here's where it gets worse. Here's what you really need to be concerned about. Climate change and the pole shift, because this is happening. Okay? Now, the Earth is undergoing a process of radical environmental change that, and I would say at best, half of 1% understand what's going on. Out of 8 billion people on this planet Earth, probably less than 0.5% are aware of what's going on. Now, why is this happening? Well, or what are some of the effects that you see from a magnetic pole shift? Well, magnetic pole shifts have happened in history before. It recharges the Earth's magnetosphere. It's absolutely vital. You don't want to delay it. It has to happen so Earth can continue to function and thrive. But it is one of those things that's part of the cycle of cataclysms that humanity has endured for a very, very long time, because I assert that human history is much longer than we've been taught or miseducated. So what's one of the effects of this weekend twisting magnetosphere as the pole is shifting? Well, we've got increased solar radiation coming in. Okay. Now, the evidence for this is quite clear, because the solar radiation is measured in UVA, UVB, and UVC. And back in the 1990s, the scale only went to 10, and routinely it's going to 15 now. Okay? Now, let me take a step back here, and I'm going to review a couple of numbers that the ancients left for the next wave of people. That would be us. Okay, they left some clues so we could understand the cataclysmic cycles. So let me simplify. Cataclysms are quite natural, even predictably cyclical. And as our solar system moves into a new age, which it is, it will be accompanied by a cataclysm. So, to simplify, every 72 years, there's 1 degree in precession. Every 2,160 years, that's 1 Platonic month age. Every 6,480 years is 1 Platonic season. Every 25,920 years counts for a great year. And I'm not going to go into all of it, because that's a long discussion and it requires the definition of a lot of different terms. But I've given you enough information here to look it up on your own. And I'll just mention the canonical cubit to give you another little clue. which would be 6 over 5 to the power of 3. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Now, the evidence for blah, 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 the maximum of 90s. Okay. I'm just going to repeat this point on the UVA and UVB, UVC things, the scale of now hitting 15. Global warming is real, but the notion that man is responsible for it due to carbon emissions, it's patently absurd. Now, if man is to take responsibility, which most certainly man is responsible for far greater ecological crimes than mere carbon emissions. And to this I'm speaking of one, pumping poison into the freshwater aquifers to break the ground apart to get natural gas out. That practice we call fracking, to poison the aquifers of the future, quite so that if the future people that do survive the cataclysm come out, they have poison to pump out of the ground to thank for this age. Let's add to that the nuclear power and the inability to dispose of that nuclear waste in any meaningful way, constructive way. Just leave it out. Not just completely give up on containment. So there'll be zones for a very long time of radiological damage, which will make it even more difficult for humans to conceive proper children in the future. So even the methods that they use to dispose of the nuclear waste, I find to be absolutely abhorrent. And like for example, they take it. I suspect the Europeans, probably the French, take it in ships and go around the coast of Africa over near Mogadishu and drop it in the water. And the fishermen, they give you all this bullshit about how the fishermen, they're pirates and they want to attack these tankers. That makes no sense. It's absurd. What would a group of tribal fishermen believe they have to do if some jerk-offs are coming dropping nuclear waste quite literally in their fishing waters? What would you do? You'd attack those ships, because one way or the other, you're dead. So the lies and stuff they feed you about piracy over there, I would reconsider that line of bullshit. All right, to the next point, crop failures, which we're already seeing right now. Farmers are freaking ultra pissed. They're not getting the help they need. The Midwest is underwater. This is evidenced for anybody that cares to look at it. People say, oh, it's man-made weather, it's weather warfare. Man is capable of great and many things. But get it out of your head that men are gods, because they are not. They have methods of weather control and remediation, but this is not weather warfare. In fact, all the spraying and all the solar remediation and all the soot and all the shit they're trying to put in the air, spraying you like bugs, is to reflect solar radiation. I mean, they're intent on trying to reflect some of that incoming solar radiation because the powers that be are aware that the pole is shifting. They're aware that we're going through a change in the magnetosphere. So they were trying to mitigate it. I believe unwisely. I think you have to put your faith in God. But, like I say, just like some of the other societal structures, it was through the intent to save as many people as possible, to try and preserve a way of life with technological means, not to destroy them, to use weather modification arrays to try and mitigate the craziness that we're already seeing in the environment. Not to kill you, But that technology will fail, again, because I talk about the complexity that's required to maintain sophisticated technologies, supply chain specialists, and such. Now, growing periods have already gotten shorter. The soils are overtaxed because they have to add chemicals to them because they wanted to get higher yields instead of doing crop rotations and things that the ancients used to do, because that's more labor intensive. And we live in a day and age where if you have the technology, take the shortcut because, well, fuck the earth, fuck natural law, fuck it, be damned. But we're going to produce as much as possible to make as much profit as possible. So you have an overabundance of people that are not exercising the wisdom to do things wisely. It's all about yield, gain. I would call it exploitation of the environment. See, this is what people get mad at capitalism. Capitalism. See, system, no matter what system that you have, the most important duty is the moral one. In my opinion, anytime you utilize a technology, you need to visualize where it begins and where it ends, so that by the time the process is through, it's as if you did nothing at all, or you've created an improvement, a better way, an improvement on the existing structure. Like plastic bags, for example. Let me just use that as an example to belabor a point. They're cheap, easy to produce. You don't have to cut down trees. And if they were properly disposed of by means of incineration, they would basically turn it back into nothing. No trash at all. But instead of actually taking that next step to put the system in place to dispose of the plastic bag properly, you end up with islands of trash and whales with bellies full of trash bags. There was a better way. Even when they built the nuclear power plants, they had a lifespan. And the people that designed them said they needed to be dismantled after a certain point. But people being irresponsible, they want to push things beyond, they want to push things more than the recommended limits, run it into the ground until it causes more harm than it ever did good. Like, I honestly believe that people that developed nuclear power thought that it would be the way to solve all the energy crisis and to bring about peace on Earth, because we didn't have to go all over the place to fight for oil. And they probably thought that there was a way to dispose of the nuclear waste in an intelligent fashion, and then after a certain time, people would have the wisdom to decommission the plants as they got older so they wouldn't leak. But that's proven not to be reality. So, crop failures. Now, talk a little bit about the genetically modified seeds. Okay. Basically, you can purchase them, but you're betting on a specific condition to create a better yield with that genetically modified seed. Whereas the longer process, there was a monk named Mendel, I believe, that did experiments with genetics when he was working, I think, with peas or pea plants, and figuring out dominant and recessive traits in the plants, basically, to create a better plant. People do it all the time with orchids. I mean, it's part of botany, it's part of science. But that process is still going to leave in these other traits. Now, genetic modification is shortcutting, which will have unintended consequences and have a less resilient seed than one that would be produced over more naturally over time as humans, as the plant would actually have the time to take on the different genetic traits that human agriculturalists would try to develop. So they're just not gonna produce the yields, and they're gonna have unintended consequences. They shouldn't be used, but then again, fuck it. So people are not realizing already that there's a giant change in the jet stream. It's dipping down because basically, since the ice in the Arctic is melting, it's going to bring that cooler air down, so the jet stream is dipping all the way down. That's why idiots, and I'll call them that, think they're going into an ice age because it's colder sometimes. You know, it's like if you're in your house and you know it's heating up, and you've got a wood stove or something. Now that wood stove will be cranking. It'll heat the whole house eventually, but if you stand at the far end of the house, you're not going to feel that heat for a good long while. It's going to be colder in some places and hotter in others, depending on where you stand. But overall, the globe is warming. Now, this has changed the jet stream because of the melting ice in the Arctic, and it's dipping down and picking up Caribbean moisture and bringing a tremendous amount of rain into the wet conditions into the atmosphere, which are moving around, dumping tremendous amounts of rain in unanticipated places. Also, basically, it creates a lot of snow in the Cascadia and the Rockies, and all that snow melts because it's hotter all at once and creates a lot of flooding because the Midwest is a flat plain. All that's going to run down and flood. That's why that's happening. Okay. But it's so disturbing that people are detached from nature that not even the farmers, who are supposed to be those among us that are most attached to nature, think we're going into a friggin' ice age. It's the level of ignorance is absolutely disturbing that anyone could possibly believe that when it's like 116 degrees in St. Louis. And we're on the cool side right now. We in the northern hemisphere are enjoying the tilt away from the issue that's coming. Now the sun, you can tell it's getting hotter. You can tell how hot it is by, you can see the blazing hot white sun. It's not that yellow of my youth. It's blazing hot white. Okay, this I have other conjectures on, but I'll speculate on that probably at a different time. Now, all the evidence is to the contrary of an ice age. The only thing that could possibly cause an ice age would actually be a stroke of good fortune, and that would be a meteor strike that would throw up enough particulate in the atmosphere to bring humans into an ice age. It's not often cold that kills. I mean, carp, frogs, they can freeze in ponds and come back to life. Even humans buried in snow have been frozen, and then there was this one lady up north that was trapped in a snowdrift. They frozen stiff. They brought her to the hospital, and almost by a miracle, she thawed out and came back to life. So it's not cold that kills. Heat, on the other hand, will kill you in a quick way, and it kills all forms of life. Now, conditions, I want to mention the conditions in the southern hemisphere because Australia is important to pay attention to. Because what's happening in Australia, that type of heat that's in the southern hemisphere will be coming to America. It will be coming to the northern hemisphere. Shade should be an industry. It's not, but it should be. So be warned. If you want to know what's coming here, look to what's happening in Australia now. And so people say, well, what do I do to prepare? What do I do to prepare? And I see a couple of guys, because already we know we're not going to get the yields of this planting season that happened this past year. And we'll see that probably next spring, the effects of this food shortages. Nations all over the world are going to have resource problems. Chinese, most definitely, they're experiencing the same types of floods in certain regions that we are. It's happening all over the world. It's a global phenomenon. That's why they call it global warming. So the guy says, listen to this guy, and he says, well, you get, how many boxes of spaghetti can you get? And some sauce, get those now. Get your canned goods. Go to the food bank, get your canned goods. Well, let me be perfectly clear. There's no amount of provisioning that you're going to be able to do that's going to be sufficient. Because today is the best day or the best days that you're ever going to have it for the rest of your life. From here on out, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to survive until you die. Now, if that's a bitter pill for you to swallow, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. And you need to get your head right in that and accept that. And if you accept that and you're mentally prepared for it, you can live into old age. If you think ahead and you build contingencies upon contingencies, you could probably survive even in relative comfort. But it's not to say that a whole lot of people aren't going to be caught in a serious world of shit. Just a currency collapse in and of itself is would be hard enough, I think, for most people to deal with. Having the benefit of seeing this and knowing the mathematical certainties of it years ago, I've had the, I wouldn't call it necessarily luxury, but I've had the opportunity to study the different facets of and permutations and possibilities and I'm completely mentally prepared. Well, maybe not completely, nobody can ever really say, but I won't be shocked. I won't go into shutdown. I have my primary concern when I do a little meta thinking is with the stresses that I've endured, considering the gravity of these problems, has given me enough time to actually deal with the realities and possibilities, to give it some thought. So I'm surprised by it or emotionally disturbed by it, and actually kind of have a good idea of what's going on. But I could not imagine what's going to happen to the average person that sticks their credit card in the machine and it just doesn't work. I don't know who they're going to blame. Blame the banks, blame the Fed, blame the government, blame the military-industrial complex. Ask yourself, why in the fuck? The military's been all over the place. They've been in the shittiest hellholes all over the world. The military doesn't have any interest in causing problems for themselves, fighting domestic insurrections. The battle best won is the one that never has to be fought. Anybody with generalship knows this. So, a lot of these excuses that people are coming up with are absurd. I watch Gregory Mannarino come on every once in a while and talk about the stock market and how everybody's a zombie and they're all idiots and blah, blah, blah. And we're going to rip the face off of this market. We know it's rigged, but we're going to play the rigged system and we're going to make all the money. We're having a fucking great time. It's wonderful because we're ripping the face off the markets. Nobody understands it better than me. Well, you got a good handle on a bullshit game, my friend. Like, you get it, but what the hell do you do with it? And what are you not getting? What's the piece that you don't understand? Yeah, a rigged market can go up forever. Don't fucking pat yourself on the back for being a player in a rigged game. Like, for me, I'm not prepossessed with material considerations. I try to live a simple life. Materialism is a spiritual blindness, which, and frankly, you just don't need it. You don't need materialism. Now, we do live in the world. I mean, we do require things to survive, and we all prefer comforts, but I mean, what's another couple of digits on the screen? What's the McMansions for? How much security can you buy? It's like if you have a garage full of gold bars, what's it really worth to you? Because people talk about, oh, cryptocurrency, it's decentralized and blah, 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 and then there's a ledger and you can't track it. Well, riddle me this here, Batman. You've got your gold coins and your silver coins and you go out to spend them. I guarantee you that somebody's going to watch you do it, and then they're going to think that you have more. And if they can get it, they're going to come after you and take it. And see, there's no amount of force that you're going to be able to use to defend yourself. What, you kill one man, 2, 100? I mean, some people are very proficient warriors. They can definitely conduct themselves and handle themselves well. But it doesn't save you from the shot in the back of the head that you don't see coming. And in those types of situations, people get the drop on you. I hear guys like Jeremiah Babe tell people, people are obese and stupid and, ignorant zombies and la la la. Well, an animalistic man can still bash your head in with a tin of fruit. They'll watch you, they'll get the drop on you, and they'll take you out. The only way to really prepare is to think of others. To think of others is to save yourself. To think of your community. To wave to people. To smile at them. To speak to them and care about them. Not as an issue of manipulation, but to be a genuine person. Not to pretend to care, but to care as a matter of being. And through cooperation, you'll succeed. But that is the path to success. It's through mutual benefit, love for your fellow man, and cooperation. Because together is the only way that you'll get through it. Which is why I appreciate the value of community so much. Charity. Because like I say, a couple of boxes of spaghetti and some canned goods are not going to last. So, this brings me on to another point, and this is more of a philosophical one. The point of survival is to enjoy life. You don't just live to live, but every day that you live, every day that you survive, appreciate it. Give thanks to God. Love it, and love your fellow man. That's the beauty, that's the joy, and the thing that I can't quite understand that people don't want to seem to grasp. The desire to take advantage or to scam or to lie or to cheat or to telling the truth is a difficult enough practice because it's hard to know what is true in yourself. But to confuse the world with lies, that's no path at all. Now, another philosophical point. The future will find your feelings and opinions to be less than trivial. And this is to say, when your survival's threatened, nobody gives a shit. So, you really got to get your head right and not complain. I mean, if you're a person of complaint, then you're not. I don't think you stand a chance. Now, to respect God with a healthy fear of the awesome power of God and give thanks for all that God provides. Because in this day and age we live in where atheism or being agnostic is kind of a prevailing philosophy, which is super ignorant. And I think it was said by somebody, I can't remember exactly who, but the quote goes something like this: atheism is rather on the lip and not in the heart of man. And I've watched even professed atheists and other people who don't pray cry out to God because they know, instinctually we all know, that God is real. It's as real gets. It's the Most High God. That's the thing. Now, I've got on the board behind me a conversation perhaps for another day about the cosmological superstructure in the higher and lower planes, but that has a little bit more to do with the psychic sciences. And I figured I would address the material considerations because it's important for people, so you can kind of get your mind right if you even do hear this message. And I'll get to the, well, what I say about, I'm just going to get to it right now, what I say about warning, contingency, and survival. Personally, I'm over shouting into the wind about what is obvious. I've got few words left for the deaf. I mean, and I'll move on here in just a moment to a larger point. The last one I wanted to address about the environmental changes is severe weather events. Expect them. Expect them. Okay. Your world is changing. Understand that. Now, I believe I'm going to conclude here. There was some other things that I was going to discuss, and I'll point you in the right direction, and perhaps maybe I will discuss it at a different time, because again, everybody likes evidence. So we can talk about Operation Yellowhammer a little bit later. Maybe, if I feel like it, ask me, maybe I'll go over it. It all depends on interest. Personally, I'd rather be playing Fallout, but, I do care about you, and I do care about your survival. That's the God's honest truth. I care about you. So, I'm going to conclude with a little bit of philosophy and how I feel. Frustrated with the way of the world, I petition the wise with a humble heart. It is not a fear of death that compels me towards this goal, but a repository of life, peace, and beauty that I seek to impart before I depart, with much more to learn. I would hallow the ground to return to the company of my lost brothers and sisters. Prepared are many paths of contingencies. I will live comfortably until the good Lord recalls my spirit back to service of another kind. I have suffered enough to require no more. I enjoy the delights of the terrestrial form I like being alive. I like the physical sensations. And like the happy hall with the long spoons, some angelic company in the world, but not of it. So, my love to you all. It's been your Pajama Scholar, Ambient Glow Radio. Catch you on the flip side.